Thank you, Sister Angela.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Because I want to go back and watch this.
Okay. So that's basically what a tool is. A tool is used by another person. In the language of the text, it is a person that is effect, that is being used by someone that is cause.
Mm.
So in Old English, the root word, it means to prepare for use. So when you use that word with respect to our concept, for one to be used as a tool, they must first be prepared in order to be used, correct?
Yes, sir. Even forging a hammer or whatever, it has to be made first.
There has to be a preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we look at our history, there is the slave trader, there's the
Mm-hmm.
slave owner, but in the schools they never speak about the slave maker.
Right.
And a great movie, if you have not already seen it, is a movie called Goodbye Uncle Tom. Has anyone ever heard that movie before?
I think I have. Yes, sir.
Okay. Goodbye Uncle Tom, from my understanding, is based on historical documents that shows what took place during the 64 hidden years down in the Caribbean. When they would bring the slaves from Africa to the Caribbean first, they put them through 64 years of basically buck breaking, and then took the finished product up to North America, United States.
Interesting.
And when you look at the 64 years, if you look at this movie, think of the best way I can explain this using our supreme wisdom lessons, along with the concept of Dianetics. The slave maker and the 64 hidden years is describing a type of Patmos or Pelon, where a grafting took place that grafted God into devil. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay. It's like grafting the original man into the colored man. Because we weren't that when we were in Africa, correct?
Right.
That's
But
true.
we were that when they brought us to North America.
Mm-hmm.
So in
Correct.
Africa, that was the start. In North America was the stop. Well, where did the change take place? Because we're talking about cycles of action, right?
Right.
That change didn't take place on a boat from Africa to the United States. That change process took place in the Caribbean. That's the 64 hidden years of 1555 to 1619.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at our lessons, why does the devil keep our people illiterate? So here, if we take this lesson, but we look at it internally, can we say that the devil represents the reactive mind?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. And if that being the case, then the reactive mind or the engram bank can be considered that which manipulates us through valences and personalities on our time track, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we're constantly being shifted into other valences, then wouldn't that mean that we are blind to ourselves?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
So whenever we look in the mirror, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we looking at ourselves or are we looking at a valence? Are we looking at a personality? When was the last time we saw our true self, and have we ever seen our true self? If we look at the statement, accept your own and be yourself, could that be the equivalent of getting past all of the valences and personalities and finding who we really are? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Cycles of action. What is a cycle? from what's called the Pilot Dictionary, the Dianetics Pilot Dictionary. It's a span of time with a beginning and an end, a section of the totality of time with a beginning and an end. It's an interval of time during which a sequence of a recurring succession of events or phenomena is completed. It's a course or series of events or operations that recur regularly and usually lead back to the starting point. In other words, each cycle leads to another cycle. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the end of a cycle becomes the start of another cycle, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can we find that in our teachings anywhere?
That the end of the a cycle is the beginning of another one.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's see.
That in our Supreme Wisdom lessons?
I'm sure it is. Is it in what is it called?
So the
It's
cycle
something-
can mean good and bad.
Okay.
Oh, cycle can be good and bad, yes, ma'am. Mhm. A cycle
So
is just a cycle. A cycle is just a cycle.
I see a cycle of action. I mean, even in the beginning. Instruction to the laborers.
Okay, how so?
Okay. So in the instruction given to the laborers, he gives us examples of our condition,
Uh-huh.
the things that we're going to have to do to change that condition, and the things that's going to come up along the way to qualify ourselves. So that would be I guess the
A cycle of qualification.
right,
Mhm.
or the end result of what would happen at the end of this particular cycle of action.
Okay. Sister Peggy.
Oh, I was going to say the cycle of every 25,000 years, history is written.
That's where I was going, but Sister Angela makes a valid point as well. In our lesson that says what? And thus, every time his history lasts 25,000 years,
Right.
use it for another 25,000 years.
Hmm.
So the way the scientists write history, we could say they write it in cycles of 25,000 years, right?
Hmm.
Wouldn't that be a cycle of action?
Absolutely.
It's just that that cycle of action lasts 25,000 years. So what exactly is a cycle of action? Okay, the sequence that an action goes through, wherein the action is started, it's continued for as long as it's required, and then it's completed as planned. So a cycle of action is the completed change of position from one established point in space to another, or of conditions through a span of time.
Mm.
Okay. So there's a formula that L. Ron Hubbard speaks about with regards to a change of position, and that is start, change, stop, correct?
Right.
Okay. Then there's a formula with regards to condition. So start, change, stop is a change of a position, but with regards to a condition, you have creation, growth, conservation, decay, and death. Those we already know, correct? Okay. This cycle comes from, at least the first time that I ever read about it, is actually in a book called the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the books that L. Ron Hubbard mentioned that he has studied when he studied ancient Indian spirituality, the Upanishads and the Vedas. In the Bhagavad Gita, there is a story of a soldier named Arjuna who is in the chariot about to go to war with his family members, and he's in the chariot with Krishna. Now, when you read the story and you look at the symbolism, it's interesting, but the name Arjuna actually means to be clear. Thought that was an interesting coincidence.
Mhm.
And Krishna represents God incarnated in a human being. But this story is also speaking about going to war with the concepts within the self. And Krishna's relationship with Arjuna in our teachings would be like the relationship between the self-accusing spirit and the believer. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so our self-accusing spirit, if you read the Bhagavad Gita with our teachings in mind, you'll see the parallels between the Bhagavad Gita and our teachings, because one of the main lessons that is taught in the Bhagavad Gita is that God is the indwelling spirit that exists within man.
Right.
But when you look at the religion of Hinduism, it got changed into a religion that has everything as gods, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but if you go to the root of the Bhagavad Gita, it's really saying that that man has to go to war with his physical body, his self, and that the God that is necessary to fight this war is within ourselves. It's like in the Holy Quran where it says Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change their own condition, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the Bhagavad Gita is the same thing, but it's using different symbols, different symbolism, different language. It's taking symbolism from the culture and the language from that time period. Now, in the Holy Quran, we also have a cycle of action. Do we remember where that cycle of action is?
No, sir.
We've spoken about it a couple of times. You find it in Surah 87, ayat 1 through 3. It talks about Allah who creates and then makes complete. He measures and then he guides. Okay.
Right.
So create and make complete, that's your start and your stop. Your measure and your guide is how to make things go through the process of change, correct?
Yes, sir.
So it's worded a little bit different, but we still have a cycle of action in the Holy Quran. Okay. So now how is the cycle of action equivalent to a formula? Now, what exactly is a formula? Or formula is a plural of a formula. A formula is a rule that is universal. And when you plug information into a formula, you produce an output that we call an answer or a product. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, it's something we use to convert information into a solution, basically. So every action, you can choose any action you want. Every action can be broken down into its component parts, and then these components will fit into a cycle of action, like variables into an equation. And this, it basically is how I study for my tests within the fire service, and how I studied for my tests with regards to trying to finish up my mathematics. I don't try to memorize information as far as a piece of information. I strive to understand a concept in the form of a cycle. So if I understand how the thing comes about and how it ends, then I understand everything in between. So when you have test questions, you'll understand why the correct answers are right, but you'll also understand why the incorrect answers are wrong. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything that we study, and you can, I mean, this stands for anything. I haven't found anything yet that doesn't follow this. Everything that you study can be broken down to its component parts. And if you understand the component parts and you understand the relationship between the component parts, then you will understand the concept. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sister Angela.
Yes, sir. Okay. Let me see. I got a few things. I put a picture in the chat, and I came across that because I was researching my stage name. I wanted to see how many people use what I used to use as a stage name. And this came up as a part of that name.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into Shinto.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being Japanese and knowing that the mothership was built there,
Uh-huh.
I looked a little further, and I'm gonna try to interconnect all of this because I truly believe a lot brings things to us to connect it. So something you said earlier, we're gonna put a pin in that. I'm gonna connect it. Had me in supreme wisdom because I was trying to remember the very first page to the Muslim #1, Michigan. And when I went to the instruction to the laborers, I see the word copy. So it had me thinking about what Master Fard Muhammad found, dianetically speaking, in the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, as far as him not being himself in the amount of valences in him. Yet there has to be some sort of point of reference. So in Supreme Wisdom, they have us copy to line our minds up, I believe, with Master Fard Muhammad. Now, this helps us rid ourselves of things that the reactive mind may be plaguing us with, because I can tell exactly when I'm out of order or when I'm not being myself, because usually it displays a certain type of reaction. Even if it's subtle, it's still not in line with how I view the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So to interconnect Shinto with this goes back to one of our favorite lectures the minister gave about reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
He said there is no re in anything. You know, you can't find it on YouTube now, Brother Luke.
What's that?
That little piece the minister was speaking about reincarnation.
That's why I'm glad we had it, and I'm glad we recorded it, because I still
Right.
have it.
Praise. So they moving things, which makes us move to our media site. We do have a media site a lot of us don't know about, that we can go up there and watch the minister. So interconnecting the Shinto with this, in Shinto, they believe that things, not just people and objects, can convey a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Can house a spirit, can convey a spirit. And looking at it from Master Fard Muhammad's trying to, just Sister Angela, but him working with the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, especially when we're taught to study the prophets, because we can find characteristics that they had in some of us, and line our mind up with that. So I just wanted to point out or share me searching out a name that I use when I'm doing music, and Shinto coming up, this cycle of action that the master clearly used with the most honorable Elijah Muhammad to line his mind up to absorb this the information was new to the devils, because at that time they didn't even know Pluto was there.
Mm-hmm.
A platoon, or what we want to call it. So to line his mind up to be able to absorb this information, because that's what it seems like is boiling down to.
Mm-hmm.
It's boiling down to us basically getting over ourselves or emptying a receptacle to be for new information to be poured into, without it being, as they say in our lessons, tampered with or diluted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I got.
Yes, ma'am. It's interesting that you bring up that symbol, because when you deal with that, that is what you will find in front of a Shinto shrine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go into Shintoism, one of the religious books for Shintoism is called the Kojiki, Kojiki. And it's interesting because there are a lot of things in Shintoism, a lot of concepts in Shintoism that parallel our teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just state one briefly here, and that is in Shintoism, they believe in a universal spirit, kind of like the life static, which has no position in time. It's a life force that has the ability to postulate and to think, but it's not limited to time or space.
Right, right.
It's called Naohino Mitimata, I think is how it's pronounced.
Mhm.
When you go into the study of it, you have a universal spirit, and it produces the child spirit. The child spirit is what's in you and I.
Right.
And the goal of life is for the child spirit to evolve up to or back to the universal spirit. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. In Islam, you have what's called, Allah says he breathed his spirit into Adam. That's called ruh. But once ruh comes into a person, it becomes nafs. So you have ruh, the breath of life, comes into us called nafs. And if you study the Introduction to Self-Improvement Study Guide, specifically with the minister, I think it's either minister, Sister Ava speaks about Surat al-Qiyamah, Surah 75, and you go into the footnote in the introduction, it talks about the 3 levels of nafs. This represents, I want to say, this is my opinion, Allah says in the Holy Quran that he makes man complete yet incomplete, correct?
Right.
So our physical body is complete, but the spiritual being is not. So once we come to this 3-dimensional space, then we have to continue a process of evolution, correct?
Correct.
And that is to become one with Allah. And the minister talks about this in the self-improvement speech, that, the goal of life is to meet with God, but it's not to have a sit down and say, hi, God, how you doing, God, and whatnot. It's to connect or unite our essence with the essence, correct?
Right.
So if you study the Shintoism, a lot of parallels. There's a video. I'll put a reminder on here to put it as a hyperlink maybe in the chat. There's a sister in Japan who studies Shintoism. She has a video, and she says when you get into the heart of Shintoism, you're really getting into the symbolism of quantum mechanics. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay. A lot of parallels with quantum physics in Shintoism. So it's interesting that you brought that subject up. But then again, when individuals visit from the wheel, you never know what they're going to bring with them. Let's see. Cycle of action. I'm gonna give a couple of examples. The first example is the fire cycle. Now, this is something we use in the study of fire science as a cycle of action. As a building, as we study what's called structure fires in the fire service, all fires will go through the same cycle. And the key to being a firefighter is understanding what cycle you are in when you get there, so you know how much time you have and how to reverse the cycle. Does that make sense? Or really how to complete the cycle, really. So it starts out in what's called the incipient stage, meaning someone left a cigarette, someone dropped the cigarette in the waste paper basket, and now the fire has started.
Mm-hmm.
The next state is called the growth stage. So now the fire is growing. And then you have what's called fully involved. Now, between the growth stage and the fully involved stage, there's another little cycle in between. We won't go into the whole science of that, but that we usually arrive at a building when it's between the growth stage and the fully involved stage. Once in the fully involved stage, if we gain control over it, if we can gain control over that fire, then it starts what's called the decay stage. That's when we're starting to extinguish that fire. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then when we fully extinguish it, now the fire has stopped. So that is a cycle of action. And we can call that a fire cycle. Does everyone understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anything that you want to learn, anything that you want to study, at least this is what works for me. I put it into, I use the cycle of action as a formula. I look at the components of what it is that I'm trying to study, and I put the pieces together like a puzzle. What comes first? What comes next? What comes next? So once I get all the pieces together, then I ask myself the question, well, why does this come after this part? And why does this come after this part? Because knowing what is good, but knowing why shows understanding, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's kind of like create, then complete, and then you measure, and then you guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what takes place, but you know why it takes place. Does everyone follow that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then I use another example of the fire cycle that's in the Holy Quran. So in the Holy Quran, Surah 15, Ayat 44, it says, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and surely hell is the promised place for them all. It has 7 gates. For each gate is an appointed portion of them. Then if you look down in the footnote, so it'll be footnote 44a in the Maulana Muhammad Ali translation, there are 7 words that describe hell. So every time you see hell in Holy Quran, there's 7 words it could possibly be describing. Now, years ago, I was studying these seven gates of hell, these 7 words, and I realized that they actually fit into a cycle of action. So if you look at the word Jahannam, okay, Jahannam is just hell, okay? So let's say that represents the incipient stage. This is the start of fire. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then there's what's called Laza. So now the fire becomes a flame. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So this is a progression. So then what happens? The flame gets bigger and it becomes what? It becomes a burning fire. Sa'ir. Then after it becomes a burning fire, it becomes what? It becomes a scorching fire. Sakar. Now what happens after it becomes a scorching fire? Now it becomes a fierce fire. Jahim. And then you think of a building that's totally engulfed in fire. And then usually what happens when a building has been burning for a long period of time? What usually happens after that? Does anyone know?
When it's burning for a long time, is it still things?
It collapses.
Yes, yes. It's a crushing disaster.
Mm.
This is why we, in the last fire we had, which was a couple of weeks ago, I had a new firefighter with me, and we had a lot of fire. And I'm at a point now where I don't have to be the one to put the fire out. So I gave him the nozzle, and we were up there face to face with this, we call it the monster. I said, your job is to put this fire out. My job is to keep an eye on the ceiling, the stairs, and the windows. So in case things start to collapse, I'm going to grab you and we're beating feet out of here. Because why? Because usually one of the things that will happen is for fire that burns for a prolonged period of time, especially if it's in the attic, the ceiling has a tendency to come down, or the floor that we're on has a tendency to give way. So my job as the officer is to monitor what's going on inside the building, let the junior guy handle the fire, and then my job is to make sure we get the hell up out of there. That makes sense?
Right.
Yes, sir.
Because I want to go home in the morning. I'm not trying to be no superhero. I'm not trying to be on
No,
the
that's
news.
right.
I'm trying to get back. I'm trying to get back to the firehouse, get a nice hot cup of coffee, and go back to bed. That's what I want.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then after it, the last part is called the abyss. So I just thought it was interesting that the levels of fire in the Holy Quran follow a cycle of action. Any questions, comments up to this point?
You know,
Oh, go ahead.
yes, sir. When you were naming them on the different stages,
Mhm.
it's similar. Well, I don't know for sure because you talk about fire, then you talk, then you when you get into the feng shui, then you know there's fire, water, and even like the hurricanes, how they're named with the kind of power that they have.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about those steps, which is the cycles, as you're saying, it's really amazing how the name of them and you define the name is the strength and the power, just like when you talk about the planets and the gods and stuff, you know, they have those names that is named after of what they're constructed to do.
Mhm.
Am I making sense? Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's really, really a key point that you're putting in when you're talking about the cycle
Mhm.
and the names of them.
Mhm.
I mean, that's news to me. So
Mhm.
I find that fascinating to break that down like you have.
Mhm. When you get a chance, it's just go right into the Surah 15 ayat 44, and it's footnote 44a. All I did was it didn't put them in that order. But what I did was, a while back I was looking because I look for patterns.
Yes.
When I'm studying, I look for patterns, and if I can find a pattern, then it's easier for me to remember it. It's like if I find a pattern, it converts information from short-term to long-term memory more easily.
Mhm.
Okay.
I see the connection. That is a good step.
Okay. But now here's another thing but here's why this is beneficial. Because if you understand things as a cycle, then you understand the logical progression of something from point A to point B to point C. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you understand the logical progression of things. In the fire service is big on tests. There's a lot of tests, a lot of certifications. There's a lot of information you have to know. And then there is approximately 100 hours of training we have to do every year. So there's certain information it's redundant. We got to do it over and over and over because certain skills, those are the skills that save your life. So they have to become what's called muscle memory. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
And if you understand things as cycles, then when you take a test, you'll see patterns that come up in the questions.
Mm-hmm.
See
That's right.
patterns in the answers, and then
That's right.
if you have a multiple choice answer, you have 4 answers.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, there are 2 that are as wrong as 2 left shoes.
Right.
Okay, you eliminate those automatically. Then the final 2, one is near correct, and one is exactly correct. And this is where you have to really look at the fine, subtle detail of certain words. And this goes back to, I think, something Sister Anya mentioned about the significance of words. Certain words are very, very significant. And I'll give one quick example. There was a test that we had to take. And if we are rushing through the answers, the answer A and answer B were exactly the same answer, except answer A had 2 clauses joined by the word and. Answer B had the same 2 clauses joined by the word or.
Mm.
And the first clause is correct in both of them. So if rushing through, you look at answer A, or you say, oh, that's correct. But if you don't look at the second clause in the answer, The second clause was incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
When you're
Mhm.
doing a correct, what's it called in grammar?
Conjunction.
Not a conjunction. I'm looking for when you have like an incomplete clause.
Oh, yes.
But
Incomplete.
if it's joined by the word and, that means both of these have to be true for the answer to be true. Does that make sense?
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. But in the second answer, the word was or, meaning only one of those have to be true in order for the statement to be true. But if you're rushing, you'll see the first one, you'll say, oh, that's correct, without reading the second part. I hope
Mhm.
that's making sense.
No, that's how they teach us the study
Okay.
in school, that, you know, you have to look for that.
Yes.
And that's where you'll be able to answer it properly.
Mhm. There's a whole way of test taking. And this
Yes,
is
it is.
and this is one thing I try to share with the firefighters when they get ready to take their promotional exams. I take them through, I don't tell them it's word clearing and cycles of action, all that stuff. I just show them what I do to prepare for my tests.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good study. That's good study.
Good study.
The way we memorize for our student enrollment in actual facts helps a lot too, because we memorize word for word.
Word for
So
word.
we would catch that and or.
Yes, that's right. Yes, ma'am. Most definitely. Most definitely. Okay. Let me give you another example. And it just so happened, martial arts was this weekend, correct?
Absolutely.
And being a student of the martial arts, I said, okay, let me apply the cycle of action to martial arts. Is there any sisters is anyone sisters here that have taken martial arts of any type?
Yes, sir.
Well, what
Long time
style?
ago.
What style?
Taekwondo.
Sister Angela?
I said Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. Okay. Sister Patricia, what style did you take?
When I was like 12, I did karate.
Okay.
And then when I was down here 30 years ago, one of the brothers in Macon teaches Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. Okay, so you have your katas, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and your katas are, you might have kata number 1 or kata number 2. You have a start and you have a stop, correct?
Mhm.
Yes.
And then in between that, you have different blocks, different punches, and different kicks. And
Mhm.
each block and kick, it might look insignificant, but then what your sensei would do in teaching your kata, showing you how these are small little things to do when you're fighting, and you do them in such repetitions that they begin to occur naturally. It's called muscle memory. When an attack
Yes.
comes, you've already punched the individual 2 or 3 times because of muscle memory, correct?
That's
Mhm.
right.
Okay, Sister Ania.
Actually, my point was to something you said earlier, so it was really, I can put my hand down.
Oh, no, we still want to hear your point.
It's kind of off the subject now, but when you were talking about the and the or,
Okay.
it reminded me of back in the day when we used to use checks, and they asked you how, if there's, you know, 2 people on the account, and they ask you how do you want it to appear on the check.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, like, just say Mr. and Mrs. Smith or Mr. and Mrs. Muhammad.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if you say Mr. and Mrs. Muhammad, then both of you have to sign the check.
Yep.
But if you say Mr. or Mrs. Muhammad, then it only requires one of you to cash the check or sign the check.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good point. Good point. And the or makes a big difference. Sister Peggy. Saw your hand up there for a split second.
I'm sorry. I said I just had my hand up because I did Taekwondo when I was in my 20s.
Okay, Taekwondo. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example of martial arts and a cycle of action, and then you could probably put it into your particular art. I think I never took Taekwondo. I did take karate, but the style where my heart is Aikido Jiu-Jitsu. I love Aikido and I love Jiu-Jitsu. So the start, the start has to take place when the opponent attacks, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Because, the Holy Quran says a Muslim is never the aggressor.
That's right.
You can fight with those who fight well. So as soon as you attack, then I'm obligated to respond, correct?
That's automatic.
It's automatic. So combining a cycle of action with martial arts. So an overhand strike in Japanese is called shomenuchi. So you start, the opponent attacks. I know karate may have this. I'm not quite sure if Taekwondo would have this, but when you respond, you have what's called a distraction. Okay, there's a way to distract the opponent to buy you a second. And in the Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, it's called a temiwaza. I might slap or strike quickly before I apply a technique. Is that the same in Taekwondo, where you will do something to buy a moment of time to really get your main attack in order?
Or make
No,
a sign.
yeah, because I was just taught blocking. And
Okay.
the thing with the Taekwondo in particular that I took, or the sensei I was under, was a very, how can I say, forgiving, meaning it took a lot and we were taught like that because he swore we was killers. So he made us take a lot before we, but, at the same time, you could hit somebody with a death move. So maybe that's why we took.
Okay. So in the style that I had learned years ago, as the opponent attacks, and you'll see this in Wing Chun as well. You'll see it because in Wing Chun you strike and you block at the same time, and you have what's called you have techniques that will distract an opponent to buy you a second, and then what happens, and then you counterattack. Okay, so in Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, one of the techniques is called Ikkyo. It's called the first technique. So then, just as decay is the extinguishment of the fire, then bringing your opponent down to the mat, that's extinguishing the attack. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay, and then when do you know the fire is out? Well, when the opponent is on the mat, right? So once that person's all broken up and bruised up, then the fire has been extinguished, correct?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That's about right.
Huh?
I said, that's about right.
Okay. So you see how we're taking a cycle of action, but
Yes.
we're applying it to anything?
Right.
Okay, last example, mathematics. Okay, so if I look at mathematics, what I do, I start with a formula. Okay, that's my start. And I know if you've been here for any amount of time, you should be familiar with this formula, right? This is the formula for what?
Isn't it the Earth?
Circumference.
Yes,
Circumference, yeah.
both of you are correct. Circumference. So you start with a formula. What's the growth stage? You input numbers wherever you see letters or symbols, correct?
Right.
Now, that formula, what level of mathematics is that formula? That's called what? What level of mathematics is that?
Geometry.
That's kind of both. It's algebra, but it's also geometry, because geometry is algebra. Okay, that makes sense, right?
Right.
But now, once you plug numbers into it, what does it become?
Numbers.
Yeah, once you plug numbers into the formula, it just becomes arithmetic.
Ouch. I'm thinking about trigonometry, but go ahead. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, trigonometry is just algebra, specifically with dealing with triangles, right?
Right.
Okay. But once you put numbers, wherever you see letters or symbols,
Arithmetic.
now pi is 3.141 and d is diameter, 7,926. That's multiplication, right?
Yes, sir.
So now that's just plain old ordinary arithmetic, yes?
Right.
Okay, so you just converted algebra to arithmetic, but you
Mhm.
put numbers into it. Then what do? You apply the rules. Okay, and we know we should know what PEMDAS is, right?
Yep.
Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction.
Mhm.
Okay, your decay is you simplify. Just multiply the two numbers together. You'll get 24,895.56. And then your stop. You complete the cycle of action. You arrive at 24,896 miles, correct?
Right.
Okay. So we've taken the cycle of action. We've applied it to mathematics. We've applied it to physics, fire. We've applied it to martial arts. You can take any concept and use a cycle of action. And then you not only know the cycle, but you understand how to get from each step to each step until you get to the final end, correct?
Right. Right.
So now what is ignorance?
Hmm.
Our lesson says illiterate means ignorance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So illiterate means showing or marked by a lack of acquaintance with the fundamentals of a particular field of knowledge. It means violating approved patterns of speaking or writing. So in our 13 rules of instruction, it says that the laborers must speak and use grammatic pronunciation of words and symbols in past, future, present, and perfect tense, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for us, that is the approved pattern of speaking or writing, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the significance of the picture of the Savior? At the picture of the Savior, there's two key items that you'll see in the picture. What's the first?
The book and the pen.
The Holy Quran and the pen, which to me, it means read, but it also means write.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Interesting point is this. When you look at the significance of the word Ikra, that comes in Surah 96,
Right.
ayat 1 through 5, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
And that is the first revelation of the Holy Quran. My understanding is the second surah to be revealed is Al-Qalam, which is the pen.
Mm.
So through the book and through the pen, you have the first revelation of the Holy Quran and you have the second revelation of the Holy Quran. Read and write.
That's right.
So illiterate also means showing or marked by lack of familiarity with language and literature. So is this the equivalent to the misunderstood word?
Mhm.
When we show lack of familiarity with language, when we don't understand the patterns of speaking or writing, that's kind of the same as the misunderstood, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So why does the devil keep our people illiterate? We went through this already. Now here, we can say the devil represents the reactive mind, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think we stated this before, the devil, if we plug in the reactive mind for this lesson, the reactive mind is what keeps us blind to ourselves by keeping us in the valence of other people, correct?
Yes, sir.
So by keeping us in the valence of others, can the reactive mind master us?
Yes.
Well, so now what does that mean? Okay, does the reactive mind tell lies?
I believe so.
Does it steal? Meaning, does it take life from us? Does it steal our attention units?
That's right.
So if our reactive mind is lying to us, because the reactive mind is giving us circuits, and we believe these circuits are us, when really these circuits come from individuals on our time track, then the reactive mind is using, now the in the tech it'll say that the reactive mind is not a living entity. But I'll say it's living enough to keep me crazy. So I'm gonna say that it is living.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, but this kind of fits the reactive mind, right? The reactive mind is mastering us through lies and stealing our life force. Yes.
Mhm. Yes, it is.
Okay. So it's really a skunk on the inside. Could we say that?
Did you say skunk?
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's a skunk on the inside.
Thinker.
So can we say that the reactive mind is using technology?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, last but not least, where can we find the cycle of ignorance in the Holy Quran? So
It's in the, it was
so
following father, right?
give me 1 second. I gotta plug in before we go dark.
Mhm.
So here we're gonna combine the concept of the Holy Quran,
Mhm.
concept of the text, and the concept of the supreme wisdom, all into one concept and find ARC between all three.
Mhm.
Everybody ready for this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. And some of them are illiterate. They know not the book, but only from hearsay, and they do but conjecture. That is Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow, Surah 2, ayat number 78. And what we hope to show to the believers is that in this ayat is a cycle of ignorance that fits the description of the cycle of action given through the tech. So we're using the tech as a tool to go into this safe full of riches called the Holy Quran, that this ayat before we could say was locked up, but we're going to use the tools of the tech to unlock it. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So we're going to call this the ignorance formula.
Mm. Formula.
Ignorance formulae.
It's a good one.
Okay. Now this is not in any of the books that I read. This is coming straight from the Holy Quran. And this is why I believe that following the minister's instruction is so key, because if we, I'll just speak for myself. If I never studied the tech, I would have never found, with Allah's help, the things that I have been blessed to find in the Holy Quran and in our teachings without
Praise
the
to Allah.
tools. All praise is due to Allah, most definitely. Okay. So here's the ayat, and some of them are illiterate. They know not the book, but only from hearsay, and they do but conjecture. But now there's 4 points here that are very, very significant. We're going to clear these words in Arabic, and we're going to see the relationship between these words and the tech. Everyone with me? Everyone ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ready and ready to go.
All right. So we have what's called the cycle of ignorance. So our start is going to be what? They know not the book.
Mhm.
Okay.
The growth stage is going to be hearsay.
Mm.
The conservation stage is going to be conjecture. So what does that produce? They begin to decay. They become illiterate.
Right, right,
And as a
right.
result, they become what? Ignorant.
Mm.
This is the cycle of ignorance.
Oh, not the book. Hearsay.
Now let's parse this. And
Right.
the reason why this is so significant is I'm going to share with you the footnote. There was a key point in the footnote that really was the seed that started. This whole presentation, by Allah's grace, is actually based upon this one footnote I'm going to share with you. And it unlocked all this other information that we see here. So when you look at they know not the book,
Mhm.
they know not the book. This is the Arabic. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. But when you look at the word la, that means not. That's a negation. That
Mhm.
next word you'll see in there is the word alam, which means to know. It comes from the Arabic root word alim, like Allah's the best knower. He's alim, the best knower. And
Right.
then ali alimuna al kitab, the book. Okay, they know not the book.
Right.
The word kitaba means any system of writing,
Mm.
any recorded information. This is coming from the Arabic dictionary. So kitaba is not just the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran is al-kitab. It is the book. And it comes from al-kitab, right? The mother of the book. So there's a larger book that the Holy Quran comes from, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We know the Holy Quran is 6,000 years of history. And we know that when you deal with the prophets going back into the past, we have been taught that at different points in time, that Allah reveals certain portions of the book to certain people at certain times to redirect humanity, correct?
All right.
So then, based on the definition, could our time track be
Mm.
considered a kataba?
Yes, sir.
Our time track can be considered a system of writing
Mhm.
written in the language of perceptics and valences,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
It's like we have, I think there's 57 perceptics. So it's almost like a system of writing that uses 57 letters in its alphabet, we could say almost.
That's a good one.
It's a system of writing using sound and color,
Hey.
okay? The Kataba, our time track, is recorded information. What's the stable datum that we can kind of use to solidify this all together? Well, Allah says in the Holy Quran, and we have recorded everything in a book, correct?
Sir.
Okay, everything is recorded in a book, but the question is, can the book be a person?
Absolutely. I believe the
Okay.
minister book.
We recite it.
Say what?
I said, when you recite and
Mhm.
you digest it, you're able to speak what you have recited.
And not only that, but when you study what's called the TRs, and TR number 1, when you have to repeat information with intention, you have to read information as if you are the author of it.
Mhm.
Meaning you're internalizing what's being said as if it's your own. You're placing the force and power of your being behind what you say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, with prayer, doing prayer.
And doing prayer is another way of looking at that. Because if we're just praying just to get done so we can get back to what we were doing before we were praying, then we're not really praying. We're just going through the motions,
Right.
right? I would almost want to say this is why it's important for us to memorize our lessons, because if we repeat our lessons as with the mindset of we have made the lessons ours,
Yes.
then we are internalizing the lessons. Okay. When you look at Dianetics, page 5, book 1, it says Dianetics has discovered and can prove everything which happened to him in the interval of unconsciousness was fully and completely recorded. Now, if you go in the Holy Quran and you go to the introduction, page 46, it says the book of deeds is therefore within man, because the deeds are preserved by the effect which they leave on man. So now the question becomes something to think about. Where it says that some are given their book in their left hand and some are given their book in their right hand, could the left hand represent the reactive mind, and could the right hand represent the analytical mind, refiled and stored in memory without the charge?
Oh, yes, yes, sir.
Okay, there's something to think about. Left hand
I'm
and right hand.
thinking. I'm thinking.
Okay,
Mhm.
in the Holy Quran, it says it is said to be a prison in one case because the evil deeds hamper a man's progress and keep his faculties for the doing of great and good deeds shut up, as it were in a prison. And in the other case, it is said to be in the highest places. Well, doesn't this sound like the reactive mind and the analytical mind again?
Mhm.
Yes, sir.
So do the deeds of the reactive mind keep our faculties of doing good locked up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it sounds like this prison, there's a couple of ayats in the Quran where it talks about his prison being a book. It's almost like it's describing the reactive mind or the engram bank. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the word prison is sajana, which means to jail, it means to imprison, and it means to be held captive. So chronic re-stimulation is kind of like a prison sentence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I say, heck yeah.
Heck yeah. So if that's the case, if chronic re-stimulation is a prison sentence, well then our mind would be the cell, right?
Absolutely.
So
Whew.
we're stuck in solitary confinement in our reactive mind, yes?
Oh my goodness.
I gotta put my hand up for that one, brother.
What is it, Angela?
Okay, we gotta go to Star Trek. I think it's Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
Okay, remember when I think he was the navigation officer, the curly hair guy? He something happened with him on a planet and he was sentenced to prison, but it happened in 15 minutes and it was in his mind.
He was sentenced to prison for 50 years and it was in his mind.
Yeah, it only happened for 15 days. They put him on some machine. And I'm glad this came back up because actually they're on to this now. They're trying to create a machine to do this in waking life. So it was the officer with the curly hair on Deep Space Nine. He got into something on another planet and they imprisoned him in his own mind. His reactive mind was so crazy he committed murder
I vaguely remember that one.
over food. And this is a science officer, the head engineer. He was the chief of engineering. That's who he is. He's the chief of engineering.
Uh-huh.
And he was brought to the level of a savage.
I do remember that vaguely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it.
I do remember that.
I just that mind just a cell got me.
I do remember that. And I'll give you another one, Sister Angela.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the episode of Star Trek, Next Generation, when
Okay.
they got stuck on that planet with that clown and they got trapped?
Oh my goodness, yes.
That clown would be like the reactive mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had to trick, if you notice, they tricked the clown,
Yeah,
and at
they
the end,
did.
he started taking everything from him. What were they doing? They were producing a clear. They were removing the
Right.
mind. That's
Right.
just for the Trekkies that are in the room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if chronic re-stimulation is a prison sentence, our mind is the cell, then the reactive mind would be the ward, correct?
You better teach now.
If the reactive mind is the ward, then the correctional officers, those are the valences and allies, right?
Woo! Mm-hmm.
Because you have some officers that cause problems, and then you have some that try to be your friend,
Right.
but then they'll turn on you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's those the allied computations and the valences, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, they know not the book could refer to any collection of data. Okay, so for example, the book could be applied to those that oppose or speak against Dianetics. So individuals don't know the Dianetics, so they speak against it based on hearsay and conjecture, right?
Right.
Okay. They don't know about the Nation of Islam only through what they heard from hearsay or conjecture.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know nothing about the most honorable Elijah Muhammad except through hearsay and through conjecture. They speak about the minister based on what? Hearsay and conjecture, correct? Is this making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they know not the book. So the book could be any data, or the book could be a person,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Any thought, idea, concept that would lead in a positive direction, people have a tendency to speak against it based on what? Hearsay and conjecture. Why? They really don't know the book.
Illiterate,
They
right?
don't know the minister. They don't know the messenger. They don't know Dianetics. They don't know L. Ron Hubbard. Now, what is hearsay? And this is the key word with the key footnote. And I want to see if you catch something here.
Okay.
To prove the text is in the Holy Quran. The word hearsay it means rumor. Hearsay evidence is evidence based not on a witness's personal knowledge, but on another statement not made under oath. So when you repeat what someone else said and they're not there to justify or defend it, that's called hearsay evidence, and it cannot be introduced into evidence, correct?
Right.
Okay. The Arabic word is amaniya. Amaniya. Now, I want to see if you catch this in here. In the footnote 78a, Maulana Muhammad Ali translation, it says the word aman is plural of umniya, which means a desire, and also carries the significance of lying, because desire leads to lies. Some understand by it the repetition of words without knowing their significance.
Mm-mm.
Do you see that right there?
Repetition of words. Yes, sir. I caught it.
Isn't that the misunderstood?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that means the word amaniya in Arabic in the Holy Quran is equivalent to the mu of the text, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Does everyone follow that?
Right.
Okay.
That's a key, and also, Brother Luke. Most of us react off of words,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we have to go beyond a certain time of understanding that were meant for someone or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But in our engram, we take it on as for us. It's a misunderstood.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So so I read this in the footnote. This is what triggered this whole PowerPoint. This one little sentence, the repetition of words without knowing. I said that is a misunderstood. That's the whole point about our clearing of words, correct?
Exactly. And taking somebody else's word for something, especially an enemy's word for it.
Exactly. Because Allah says in the Holy Quran that when an unrighteous person brings you news, you have to look into that, right? Because they can mislead you without, they can misguide you or mislead you without you being aware.
Right.
Okay.
Or killed. You can get killed from that.
Or you can get killed there too. So now, what are the reasons why they don't know the book or they don't know any data? Well,
Yeah, literally.
one is they're not reading and we're not writing, correct?
That's right.
Okay. I think it was Brother Abdul Hafiz, may Allah be pleased with him. This is why I first heard the statement when you, and I think Brother Islam, you can correct me if I'm wrong. When you listen, you're correct, but when you write, you're exact, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's the significance of writing information, because now you can remember what the minister said, but if you wrote it down,
You
Yes.
understand it.
okay, it almost
There's
becomes like a
note-taking.
hadith.
Mm-hmm.
The second point is they're involved in the repetition of usage of words without knowing their significance. Individuals use words and don't know the meaning of the words.
Yes,
That's misunderstood, right?
mess the whole sentence up.
Okay. In other words, we may be reading, but we don't understand the words we speak.
Mm,
The words
that's
that
right.
we're reading. So then we're guilty of also what? Following from hearsay and conjecture.
Right.
Okay. So what is conjecture? Conjecture means thought, inference, or opinion based on incomplete, insufficient, or without evidence or proof. Okay. So what are the three locks that take us from knowledge to ignorance? Now we know we have the three locks in the Panama Canal, correct?
Mhm.
And the way I heard the minister explain it, and I'm paraphrasing it, when you look at the Atlantic Ocean, represents stormy weather. Pacific Ocean represents peaceful. That's where you get the word pacify from, Pacific and pacify, calm.
Right.
So instead of going all the way down and traveling down the bottom or the southern tip of South America, you just cross over the Panama Canal and you're doing it 3 steps, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you look at that, not only is it teaching us about the Panama Canal and going from point A to point B in 3 steps, but this is another formula that is applicable, meaning, can we say that we go from aberrated to clear in 3 steps?
We can.
You go from point maybe 0.5 up to 2.0, and then 2.0 to 2.5, and then 2.5 up to 4.0, right? Or we can
Yes.
say from animal to human to divine.
Mm.
3 levels of growth and development in our study guides, correct?
Right.
Okay, so we have 3 locks. So what are the 3 locks? No reading or writing is the first lock.
Mm-hmm.
So people stop reading and stop writing. Look at the educational system now. If you want to hide something from a child, just write in cursive.
Yes, Lord.
So sad.
Yeah,
And it's true. It's true though.
but we don't write, and the only writing we do is text. LAMAO, BRB, everything
Mhm.
is, so we're not even writing anymore.
You know, shorthand.
And then ask children the last book they read. Some children don't even read book. The second lock to ignorance is what? The misunderstood word. And then the third lock to ignorance is what? Failure to prove or provide evidence.
Ooh, Lord, yes.
Failure to
Speed this up
prove.
for you, Sister Angela, 'cause I know you got to go to the next Zoom meeting, so I'm gonna try to speed
Yes,
this.
sir. I'm hanging.
Okay. So these 3 elements lead to illiteracy and ignorance. Now let's look at the cycle from another viewpoint. How does one keep people ignorant or illiterate? 1, you withhold understanding, and /or you provide false data. The first slaves that came to North America were indentured servants. Lie number 1.
Right.
Okay. Black folks were, our Black History Month, we go back and we look at Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass, but we never deal with what did our people do prior to slavery? Let's look at that. Can't find those books in the library. So when one does not understand, then what does that lead to? It leads to the removal of the ability or desire to even read or write. And in a text, that's called a blow. And what is a blow? It's an unauthorized departure from an area, usually caused by misunderstood data or overts. Any sudden and relatively unexplained departure from session, post, job, location, or area. In other words, when you look at all the things we have started to study and we have stopped, 9 times out of 10, we have stopped and we have used excuses as to why we stopped studying and blamed somebody else. And it boiled down to, we hit across a misunderstood word. We didn't take the time to do the clearing or find the steep gradient or add mass. So we say, well, the teacher didn't like me, or I had problems with the teacher, or this, that, and the other, or we come up with excuses and we stop studying.
Oh.
So the manifestation of blow stems from this 3rd aspect of study, which is the misunderstood definition, or the not comprehended definition, or the undefined word. Okay. Again, it goes back to what? The repetition of words that we use and we don't know the meaning of. And then what happens? Well, this leads to our inability to support our opinions or prove our statements with evidence. Now we're just talking about stuff that makes no sense and you can't prove nothing. And we say, well, this is my opinion. well, your opinion is wrong. Here's the evidence. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So now when one is unable to support their thoughts, ideas, and opinions with evidence or proof, it leads to what? It leads to ignorance. So now you like that brother that was in the cell on Living Color and using all these big words that make no sense.
Yeah.
So now you're just flatulating your intellect as you juxtapose the concepts of the
big word.
expectatiousness of, yeah, you don't even know what the hell you're saying.
Right.
Mhm.
Flashback.
Yeah, right, flashback. So now this brings us to the Arabic word, which means what? One that neither reads or writes. And then what happens? You and I will become what? Illiterate and ignorant.
Mhm.
Well, the death stop should be illiterate. That should be illiterate. Okay, summary. I'm gonna wrap this up. Do I got 5 minutes, Sister Angela?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So an understanding of the components of a cycle of action can be used to better understand the cause and effect behind actions, thoughts, ideas, and concepts. If you understand the concept of cycle of action, anything that you study will fit into the cycle of action. Ignorance and illiteracy can be seen as a cycle of action with its elements and components. The principles of Dianetics, the science of the mind, can be found in the Holy Quran and the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And I know we say this every week, but I'm saying it again. Can we see that the tech is in our, we already have the tech, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So our ignorance of any subject based on the terms found in the Holy Quran can be traced back to our failure to study, our failure to write, our failure to increase our vocabulary, and our inability to speak in the proper terms. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, closing statement. There's a book called How to Read a Book, The Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. If you don't have this book in your library, you're doing yourself a disservice. This book should be in anyone that is a reader, this is my opinion, should have this book in their library. This is an extraordinary book. First copyright was 1940. And there's a study guide written by Brother Jabril that's dated May 26, 1982. He mentions this book by name. There's a series of study guides Brother Jabril wrote from 1982 to 1984 or 1985, if I'm not mistaken. But this is written in his word as one of the books that they were studying. There's two key concepts, and then we'll close it out. This will be done in just a minute or so. So there's a concept in this book about speaking 400 words. Now remember, this is 1940. Our lessons 1934, 1935, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the question, you almost have to ask yourself the question, where did they get this data for this book about speaking 400 words? And then the significance of repeating the recordings. Here's where we're going to end it. This is what the book says about speaking 400 words. It says, the child who is not yet ready to read is frustrated if attempts are made to teach him. And he may carry over his dislike for the experience into his later school career and even into adult life. In the second stage, because in this book it talks about the 4 stages of reading, children learn to read very simple materials. They usually begin, at least in the United States, by learning a few sight words and typically manage to master perhaps 300 to 400 words by the end of the first year. In other words, if a child has a vocabulary of 400 words at the end of the first year, then some of us have the vocabulary of a 1-year-old. Does that make sense?
Absolute sense.
Okay. And here's the last part. The significance of this whole thing that we're talking about, speaking based on hearsay and conjecture. He says, one of the reasons for this situation is that the very media we have mentioned are so designed as to make thinking seem unnecessary, though this is only an appearance. The packaging of intellectual positions and views is one of the most active enterprises of some of the best minds of our day. The viewer of television, the listener to radio, the reader of magazines is presented with a whole complex of elements, all the way from ingenious rhetoric to carefully selected data and statistics, to make it easy for him to make up his own mind, quote unquote, make up his own mind, even though he's not making up his own mind, with the minimum of difficulty and effort. But the packaging is often done so effectively that the viewer, listener, or reader does not make up his own mind at all. Instead, he inserts a packaged opinion into his mind, somewhat like inserting a cassette into a cassette player, kind of like the movie Inception. He then pushes a button and plays back the opinion whenever it seems appropriate to do so. We're just repeating what other people say with authority. He has performed acceptably without having had to think. And this is what this world is producing. Individuals that follow, they don't know anything about the subject in which they're speaking, and they're just following based on hearsay and conjecture. This is causing us to become illiterate, and then it causes us to be ignorant. And what is the end result? The devil does what? He keeps us illiterate, ignorant, so he can use us for a tool and a slave. Why? He keeps us blind to himself so he can master them. Why the educational system in the state that it's in is to make us better tools. Thoughts, questions, concerns, cognitions, postulates, whims. Does anyone have anything they would like to share before we wrap it up?
I have to go over this again.
Okay.
Let me myself now. Assalamu alaikum. Happy.
You know, what I love about the minister when he speak on his lectures, he always tell us to research what I say. And, you know, I know when I first came in, we were always told to have a pen in the notebook. And my understanding was, if you hear something, you write it down, because sometimes you don't have time to ask questions. So you go back and you study what you wrote down, and you go and research what you wrote down. You come down here. And when we read, and like we said, the words that we read, if we don't have that understanding of that word, then you write it down, and then you define that word, and then go back and reread what you have read. So the idea is, I see, is for us not to be illiterate or ignorant, because we have the tools to use to help us to be not in that state. So see, we just have to apply what we have been given. It's really simple. But see, it's that moment to say the desire, you know, when you have desire, you have will. And once you actually push yourself to do that, you on, I mean, in slang, you on and running because you're doing something repetitively over and over and over. And like you said, can a human be a book? Yes, they can. You know, if you're studying deep, I mean, there's some deep studies. When I first got in the nation, I feel so sad within myself, because I would take time, at least 3 hours, to study. And even the language of Arabic, you know, I had a little book. I would go over the words and stuff, you know, maybe I wasn't pronouncing right, but if you keep trying to take that's what they teach children, you know, you take that word and sound it out. And you take that letter and sound it out, you know. And even trying to teach yourself to read, you got to learn what that letter sound is. Then when you start that letter sound, each letter you sound out, you're actually starting to read. So the importance of a pen and the paper is very important. Not only to read, to learn, to be profound when you talking. Like you say, you just shouting stuff out. The heck did you say?
Mhm.
But when you understand what you say, it sounds a lot better. You be fluent in what you say. So this is a good session. This is it's kind of
Praise
like
be to
putting you
Allah.
back on track of what we need to be doing.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you, Sister Patricia. Anyone else? Before we wrap it up,
Yes, sir. I just wanted to thank you once again for your effort in laying out and making things that appeared hard to understand understandable. So I do appreciate your effort.
all praise is due to Allah. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Let's look at the chat. Let's see what we got here. Cycles of action are wheels within the wheels. Yes, most definitely. Yes, I can see that. Now that, Sister Peggy's an interesting question. It's been said that the Prophet Muhammad could not read. Why was he asked to read? And it says original rules of instruction, the register must be free of devils named. Each of us can be a register in the valence of the former slave master in his. Yes. Yes. Each one of us can be a register. Yes. That's a whole nother. Let me write that down. That's a whole nother class, I guess. I see something deeper in that one. So the question is, if the prophet couldn't read, why would Jibril tell him to read? That's an interesting question. I know the minister has taught him that. Who can remember how the minister explained that?
What was the question?
Sister Peggy was asking the question along the lines of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was illiterate, correct? He's called the Ummi prophet. He didn't read. So when Jibril is saying Ikra, read,
Right.
there's no Holy Quran. The Holy Quran did not come about until after the death of the Prophet. So when Jibril is saying Ikra, read, understand one point, Ikra in Arabic means more than read. It means to study, to investigate, to look at closely, okay, to examine. Now the question is, what did the prophet read if he was illiterate? Interesting question. Now, based on my kindergarten understanding, this is how I would respond to that. If you look in the Holy Quran, there's a lot of parables, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The parable of the gnat, the parable of the clouds, the parable of this, the parable of that. Did Prophet Muhammad look in his environment and look at different things in his environment and was able to see within certain things that were taking place and see higher levels of understanding through the things that were in his environment? Could Ikra mean read? Didn't Minister Ishmael just today talk about how the minister reads the universe? Didn't he?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, Brother Lukman, when you said that, if you go back in ancient time, there was always pictures of an animal on the walls of, and they were actually coded, decoded. So when you're talking, like you said, with little children, and they start off with just pictures, the child talk about what they see, not to say it's wrong or right, but what do they see? What are you looking at?
Mhm.
And they talk to you and tell you, the bird is up, and they describe what they see when you say the environment. So if you're in an environment and in a location, you talk about what you see with your eyes, which is really reading, because you're actually visualizing what you assume to say is the book.
Mhm.
This would be my understanding, is when you look, you're reading because you're giving your insight of what you see.
And that is right in line with page 19 of Closing the Gap. It says that the Savior used to teach the believers as you would teach children. You would teach them through pictures, correct?
That's right.
It said the picture is not the truth, but the picture contains the truth.
Mhm.
Looking into a picture, every time you look in the picture, you're going to see something different, correct?
Correct.
It's the same concept of when you go and you audit someone.
Yeah, you
Audit it
collect
from
data.
start to finish. And they say, is there anything else on this event? They say no. Go back to the beginning, go over it again, and pick up whatever additional data you can contact, right?
Yes, sir.
And then when you recount that, more data comes out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Every time you look in the picture, more data comes out.
Mm-hmm.
We could repeat Lost Found Muslim lesson number 1 right now. We can repeat the question, we can repeat the answer. And if we were to do that and just stick with just lesson number 1 and do that for an hour, I would bet my last dollar that where we end an hour from now will be nowhere near the first time we go through the lesson. We will have so much more data.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if we were to do that, if we memorized our lessons and we just took a day, or if we just took an hour, go through lesson number 1,
Mm-hmm.
read it, and then write cognitions that come to mind. Just write down the cognitions on a piece of paper. Write down all the cognitions. You get to the end of it. Go back to the beginning, go over it again, and pick up the additional data. When you read through the second time, you're going to pick up more thoughts, more ideas, more cognitions.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at Mother Tanetta Muhammad, going through the Holy Quran once a week, going through the lessons. Minister Farrakhan, reading the Holy Quran. Brother Jabril said that he had a Holy Quran, I'm paraphrasing it, that was so worn, he said the words were falling out.
Yes, sir.
That he was going through the Holy Quran so much the words were falling out.
Mm.
We see the great minds in front of us as examples. But
Yes.
we realize to get to that point take discipline. It takes
Yes,
study.
it does.
Okay. And it's all summed up in that picture of the Savior. Holy Quran and a pen. Read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost want to say there's an article, I got to find this. I think it was Brother Jabril. I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it was Brother Jabril. I could be wrong. He talked about, I'm paraphrasing it, talked about if the Savior did everything right and exact, then what page was he looking at in that picture?
Mm.
That's a good one.
And if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. I'm trying to remember this one. I got to try to find this now. The exact center of the Holy Quran falls, I think, on an ayat called the heart of the Quran. I think.
36.
Is it 36?
Yes.
So that's our assignment. I think it was Brother Jabril in an article, Farrakhan the Traveler, where he mentioned it, but I can't recall it right now. Because the Savior wouldn't just, I'm thinking, this is in my kindergarten understanding, wouldn't just open to any page when he took that picture. Everything has meaning, everything has purpose, right?
Yes.
So what would be the exact center of the Holy Quran? That's the question.
But
But
you know, Brother Lukman, sometimes when I would just open up the Quran, and when that page opened up, it relates to something that was going on that day or at, you know,
Mhm.
and I was like, whoa, you know. And so it makes you wonder now, because if, like you said, why was that book open? And it do look like the middle of the book when you see the length of the pages. You know, one like at the end or at the beginning. And that is, now see, that's research.
Let's see. What is the center of the Holy Quran? Oh, there's a math. Oh boy, there is. I'll try to figure this out for our next. I'll try to figure this out for our next class. There is. Go ahead. Someone has something.
The center of the Holy Quran, wouldn't you divide it by how many ayats in the Holy Quran? By half?
Yeah, we talked
Not
about that.
necessarily, because not all the ayats are the same size.
Okay.
There is. This is saying that Surah Al-Kahf.
Did we talk about this?
Or you would go by letters?
There is, and I've seen this somewhere. There is something in the Holy Quran, and I think it's the Arabic word for center, that just so happens to be the center of the Holy Quran. It's a mathematically precise way of finding the exact center. I'm gonna write this down. I will try to find it and share that in our next meeting.
At one time, I thought it was the page where it said read, you know, what you can't say it right, but was with the pen, what you know, how'd that go? I hear it all the time. Can't say it right.
Yeah, I gotta find. I've read about this before, and I can't recall it, but I gotta do the study and find it again. Go ahead, Sister Peggy.
I was going to say that, didn't we talk about this one other time, like several months ago? I know it was before I fell. We were talking about that this mathematician from Iran, and we were talking about
Yes,
ayat
yes.
and things, and I can't remember exactly, but we did talk about it once.
We talk about the mathematical code.
Yes.
Yes, we did. We talked about the surah where it talks about the even and the odd.
Yes, the even and the odd.
The even and the odd.
Uh-huh.
There is something. There's a word, and the word itself it either means center, or it's related to the word center, which is found at the exact center of the Holy Quran. I've read this before. I can't place it, but now I got to find it. So I'll find it. If I find it before our next meeting, I'll just send it out on our text message so you can get it ASAP.
Is it the word kahaf? Kahaf, Kahaf?
I can't remember. I gotta get the stable data now, because now it's like I have to remember this. I'll post it on the Facebook page and I'll send it out. That way, as soon as I find it, I'll send it. That way you have it as well. But it just shows that the Holy Quran is written according to a mathematical, it's written according to number theory.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever want to have a good read, just download that book, go print it out. It's free. Just go print it out. You know, have them do the little spiral binding on it like I did on mine. That way you have your own copy. And then you can just go to town if you're a mathematical a math nerd like I am. I love math. I love trying to figure stuff out. But that book, the mathematics of the Holy Quran is complicated.
Yeah, I did a Google search and it's a word, it says it's a word yatala,
Uh-huh,
something like I can't pronounce it,
uh-huh.
as the center of the Quran.
While
W,
Yatalataf.
yeah, WAL hyphen
Uh-huh.
YATALATTAF.
Uh-huh.
And that's what they're, but well, I don't know, maybe that's something totally different.
Mhm.
Anyway,
I'll find it.
you do you, thank you.
Yeah, I'll find it and get it to us.
Brother Lukman,
Yes.
what book is you talking about to download?
There's a book called, it's called Ultimate Mathematics. And what I will do is let me turn this off so you can see it. You won't be able to see it with my background. So turn my back. So this is what it looks like. Wait. Okay. It's called Ultimate Mathematics. It's fairly thick, but it's a free download. You can download it at your own convenience, and then print it off. Then you have your own copy, and then you can read it. I mean, it's an awesome book. He goes into the whole mathematical structure of how every surah and the number of ayats in the surah is based on prime numbers. It's based on formula and calculation. It's just not randomly, for example, when you look at surah, if I look at surah, like the first one, Surah Al-Alaq, the clock, okay? It just so happens to have 19 verses. Is that number 19? And I think so if you take 96 and put it next to 19, I believe that's a prime number. But there's a way that number is calculated so that Surah 96 has 19 ayats. Every Surah and its ayats. If you look at, for example, look at Surah 2, Surah Al-Baqarah. There's a reason why it has 286 verses. You ever thought about that? Why do certain surahs have certain number of ayats?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I did.
When you look at the ayat that talks about by the even and the odd, we'll do this at another time, but by the even and the odd, there's a formula that if you take the ayat, like surah number 2 has 286 ayats, right? And if you add 286 and 2, you get 288, correct? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, Surah 2 has 286 ayats. You add those together, 286 plus 2 is 288, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you go through the whole Holy Quran and you add the number of, if you add the ayats to the actual number of the Holy Quran, half of them will be an even number and half of them will be an odd number. Exactly. That's one of the mathematical codes of the Holy Quran.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that an individual could not just randomly put the Holy Quran together because there's too much mathematics that prove. So when Allah says, and if you And if you try to write a book like it and you can never do it, then be in your guard against a fire whose fuel is men and stones. Allah is saying you can't reproduce, not even a chapter like this book. There's too much mathematics involved.
So
But
are,
unless we have an appreciation for mathematics, we will never be able to see the underlying mathematical patterns, the beauty of the Holy Quran, prime numbers and permutations and number theory and all those other things. The prophet didn't know anything about that. And remember, the prophet wasn't present during the formation of the book into its present day structure, correct?
are you able to drop the name of that download in the Quranic, I mean, in the chat, so I can download it?
I know I cannot find it online. However, because I did send it out years ago,
And you said,
and I think I sent it out maybe when we talked about this, I sent it out in an email. I'll find it, I'll resend that email so you can download the PDF to your computer and then go
Okay.
print it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. It is only 186 pages,
Okay,
but it's an awesome, but whew, hopefully you have a better shot at it than I did, because I haven't gotten past the second chapter yet. So. Anyone else? So, brother Salam, assalamu alaikum. How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing fine, praise be to Allah. Excuse me for catching on too late, but I couldn't miss this.
No, we're glad to see you, brother, as always, And brother Wahid is with us again. Assalamu alaikum, brother Wahid. We're glad to have you. And I think that is everyone. And if there's no other questions, comments, or thoughts, we will end it. For those that would like to get on closing the gap, next Zoom meeting, you can get on to the next Zoom meeting. Let us go ahead and close it out in prayer. Attention prayer. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the world, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment in which we now live. Thee alone do we serve, thine aid do we seek. Please, Allah, guide us on the straight path, the path upon whom thou hast bestowed favors, not the path upon whom thy wrath is brought down, nor those who go astray if they've heard thy teachings. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum, family.
Malaikum.
Well, Salam, sir.
Salam.